Hi, my name is Mike Pecci. I am a director. I do commercials and music videos and films, and you're listening to The Go Creative Show.
Hey everyone, my name is Ben Consoli. I am a director and owner of BC Media Productions. This is The Go Creative Show, the show dedicated to creative professionals and filmmakers. Today we discuss the director's process with our guest, Mike Pecci. The Go Creative Show is supported by Hedge, Shutterstock, Rule Boston Camera, and Premium Beat. Now, we have not had a show like this in a while on Go Creative Show. Our guest, Mike Pecci, is a commercial director, or not even just commercials anymore. He's doing short films, transitioning into feature films. But what's so great about this discussion is that he is at a point in his career that I think a lot of us can relate to, you know? He is grinding it out daily, building relationships. He just recently moved to Los Angeles. So he's at the beginning of what's going to be an enormously successful directing career in Hollywood, for sure. So it's a great time to talk to Mike because, you know, he's able to give us some honesty here. He's able to really let us know what it's like in the trenches, trying to build those relationships. You know, going to meetings and pitching ideas and all of the stuff that people do at the beginning of their filmmaking career, at, you know, a high-level filmmaking career. That's where Mike is. He's incredibly honest, and he's also a Boston guy. So he and I talk a lot about the Boston industry and how it relates to other areas around the country, around the world. You know, this is some honest discussion about production. Of course, we talk about his films and the works that he's done and how he's achieved them. We talk a lot about lighting and cameras and all the stuff that you expect here at Go Creative Show. But because we have a director sort of at the beginning of their filmmaking career, their high-level filmmaking career, it's a really unique point of view that I think all of you guys are certainly going to love here in the Go Creative Show audience. So we're going to get to all of that in just a couple of minutes. Yeah, his most recent film, or one of his more recent film, I should say, the entire thing was in Russian. And he doesn't speak Russian. It's a bold choice. Why would he do it? We get to the bottom of it and so much more coming up in just a couple of minutes. Oh, and also, I was recently on his podcast, In Love with the Process. So the best thing to do, honestly, is to take both of this episode you're listening to now and the episode where I was on his show, play them together back to back. You'll get the full discussion between us, and I think that's the best way to experience this Mike Pecci, Ben Consoli union that has happened in the month of November and December here. And that is coming up in just a couple of minutes. But before we get there, let's talk about Hedge, shall we? Hedge is a backup software for filmmakers. I love it, and I use it all the time because before Hedge, I was just dragging media around in the Finder, which is okay, you know, but it's not like the professional way to do it. You don't have the peace of mind that you get when you work with Hedge. You want to use a professional software when you're in professional circumstances. Think about it. Your media is your livelihood. It just is. You want to treat it the right way. Backing up your media is so important, right? And Hedge lets you do it easy and fast. You can import multiple sources and send it to multiple destinations at the same time. So you take all of your media cards at the end of a shoot day, toss it into Hedge, plug in your couple of hard drives or whatever you do for your destinations, press transfer, and it just goes. It just goes. And you get a notification on your phone, too, if you have the Hedge Connect app. You get a notification when the transfer is done. So it's peace of mind, it's speed, it's everything that you want that you cannot get from dragging files around in the Finder. So start treating your media the professional way with Hedge. Visit hedge.video/Go Creative Show to get a 20% off discount off the full license. But there are many different licenses there, and the app is always being updated with new features. So you guys should certainly check it out for yourself over at hedge.video/Go Creative Show. All right, let's get to it. We've got so much to unpack here with our guest, director Mike Pecci. So I'm here with Mike Pecci, director, and so excited to have you here because you are basically in the same kind of circles as me, but we've never worked together. You're from Boston. You've worked in Boston, and now you're going out to the big time. How are you, and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. I'm very happy to be here. And yeah, it is strange that we haven't crossed paths because I was sort of kicking around Boston for quite some time. So it's weird that we didn't cross paths yet.
I've always heard your name and associated it with like really great high-end stuff, which is good. I mean, Boston's such a like small community for the film community. Everyone kind of works together in a way. Certainly there is competition, but the reality is everyone is working together toward like just getting people to shoot more in Boston and, bring up Boston as a real, filmmaking hub in the city, in the country. And like, to be associated with really good quality stuff is a good thing. And that's kind of where I think you've always been for me, and certainly the people that I work with. Your name has always been associated with great stuff.
Well, I'm very happy that that's the reputation that followed me around there. It was always, for me, and at the time with my business partner, Ian McFarland, the two of us were just very focused heavily on creating content that we thought impressed us and that we thought looked really good. And then the byproduct of that was just making good shit.
Well, and that's excellent. I mean, for just to kind of like bring people back, Mike is a director of you're making films, you've done commercials, you've done music videos, really high-end stuff. And I'll put the links to all of your stuff in the show notes so that you guys can check it out. And a large, portion of your career was in Boston. And what I'm interested in today to talk about is just your process in creating these short films. Where are you getting the funding? Where are you doing the distribution? Where are you finding your actors? Just the way that you put this together, because a lot of times we have cinematographers on the Go Creative Show, and I guess their part of the process is so narrow and so technical that we kind of miss the broader scope of filmmaking. And that's really what I want to talk to you about today.
Yeah, well, so to give you a bit of history, when I started this, when I decided that I no longer wanted a 9-to-5 job, this was years and years ago, I ended up going to New York Film Academy in New York City, and I took one of their short courses, because at the time, this was like sort of pre any of these very specialized schools. It was probably back in like 1999, 1998. And at that time, going to a film school like Emerson or something, it was still a crapshoot. You can end up spending all that money and go to a 4-year school and then end up being a boom pole operator on everybody's movies. So I wanted to be sure that I was going to make films. And so I ended up going with this experimental school at the time, which was this New York Film Academy course thing. And what they promised was to do at least 3 short films and work on about 6 others over the course of this program, which was great, because I've always been a very hands-on guy. Before that, I used to be an airplane mechanic. I used to paint houses. I used to do all that stuff. So that's kind of where I come from.
What was your 9-to-5 that you wanted to leave?
It was, well, when I was a kid, I worked at a music store, which I used to love. And then it just became very retail-y. And then my part-time stuff, like I said, I worked at an airplane shop over in Cape Cod and Hyannis. We used to work on bleed valves off of like prop engines. And I also used to work as a house painter for years. So, the 9-to-5 was pretty much like crew labor positions. Yeah. Which I loved the camaraderie that came with that. Like, I really loved being around other dudes in shops and the joking around and the fun that you'd get from that, which strangely also exists in the film world. So it's kind of the same thing. But then I was like, and I got to do something. And I thought I wanted to get into radio, which is funny because I'm speaking into a microphone right now. I thought I wanted to get into radio, and I went and I took I had my first radio show at a community college, and it was like a 3 a.m. show. And the program director was like, "Hey, all right, so every 15 minutes you could play a CD with the green sticker, and at the bottom of the hour you could play CDs with a blue sticker." And I'm like, "Well, what am I doing here, man? Like, why do you need me?" Yeah. And so then I just took a film course when I was in that school. It was a theory course, and I kind of had my brain blown open because before that, I like to say that I loved movies. I knew that movies weren't real, but I just didn't even think about how they were made. And this is very much pre-YouTube, pre-behind-the-scenes stuff. This is back when you watch Jurassic Park, and it's like, how the hell did they get dinosaurs?
Yeah. Yes. I remember those days.
Yeah, dude. So, I had my brain blown open when I watched Blade Runner. And the professor was like, there's a person that's in charge of the outfits, and there's a person that's in charge of each of these individual departments. And I was like, what? And so I kind of got lost in it.
So you weren't even privy to like that when you went to take the course?
No, man.
Wow.
Yeah, because
so you just went there as a movie fan. You're just like, hey, I like movies. I don't know anything about the way they're made. I just like them.
Well, and I want to be even more honest about it. It was like, I need some credits. I'll just go watch some movies. So for me, it was like, yeah, I'll just take this bullshit course. It'll be fine. And it turns out that I found the thing that I really loved. And so to get back on track here, I ended up going to New York. And the thing that New York Film Academy taught me wasn't necessarily directing. And that's kind of what I went there for. But it taught me how to produce. And I was forced to uproot myself and go live in a city where I had absolutely zero connections and try to put together 3 short films in a short period of time. So I learned how to convince people to let me shoot in their places for free. I did my casting sessions in like a Barnes & Noble coffee shop. So like it was really down and dirty and gritty, and shooting without permits in different places. So it really instilled like a good producing work ethic within me. And then when I came back home, I decided not to stay in New York because...
And home is Boston?
Yeah, Boston.
Yep.
I decided not to stay in New York because I was like, man, I've done pretty well producing here in this city, but imagine what I can pull together in a city where I know people. And so I was like, I'm going to go back to Boston and try to start a company. And so I came back here and I, at the time, this is still early internet days. At the time, I just came home and went through the yellow pages and found a couple local producers and ended up like labeling VHS tapes at the beginning. And then slowly worked my way up and learned that the lighting department was something that I really enjoyed doing on these corporate jobs. And being a young director, I really couldn't convince at the time any of these old DPs, these old crusty film 35 millimeter DPs, to work on my shit because, I'm just a kid. And so I had to teach myself how to shoot. And I decided to tackle digital. And this is right when digital started. So this was like Canon XL1. This is like GL1.
Yeah.
Very early on. And most of the digital stuff looked like video, looked like really crappy, like, basketball broadcast stuff. And so I decided that I was going to tackle that pretty hard and try to figure out how to make that look cinematic. And then the next thing you know, I was paralleling my career as a director, as a photographer, and a cinematographer. And that sort of took the forefront for a while because I was one of like 2 or 3 people in the city of Boston that was really trying to make digital work. And that did really well for me because then I got to shoot for a lot of really great directors. And then I really built my reputation around that. That's how I met my old business partner. So it was a good way in for me to do that stuff. But at the end of the day, I've been trained to be a director. And that was always my career path. That was always my passion. And I always took everything else that I was doing, whether it was photography or cinematography, as practice. So, and at that point, I feel like I was in like a master class for about 10 years, just shooting photos and learning cinematography and working for other directors.
And I think you're so right. I mean, having to teach yourself those skills, not even necessarily teach yourself, but being responsible for all aspects of the project you're working on at various points in your career really does help. Like I tell people all the time, if you want to direct, you should also be editing too. If you want to be a cinematographer, you should be direct. Like everybody should kind of do everything so that you understand what people need from you.
Completely, man. Completely. Like I was doing a short film years and years ago with a really great cinematographer in town I won't give his name away because of the statement. But I was doing a really cool short with this guy, and I remember sitting there and I was waiting for him to do one of his setups, and he had like a decent crew, and it was just taking forever. It was like a 25-minute setup thing, 30-minute setup thing. And I'm sitting there going like, what the hell's taking so long? And I went over and I talked to him. And I'm like, dude, I'm looking at the frame. The frame looks really great. What are you doing? And he's like, well, there are like these specular highlights that are happening in the background on that metal case. And I'm trying to find them and I'm trying to flag them out. And I'm like, you realize what you're doing right now is you're killing the coverage for this scene because I literally don't have enough time. So because you're obsessed with these specular highlights that the audience members aren't going to give a shit about, they don't care about that stuff, you're destroying the coverage. And he's like, I didn't think about it like that. And I said, yeah, you really need to be in the edit room. You really need to be in that space where I've always said that the movie happens in 3 different stages. There's the early stage, which is I'm going to come up with the idea. I'm going to come up with the idea and I'm going to plan this thing out. And that's really exciting because there's no limits to it. So you're just like, cool. And then there's a tank that drives through a house and then it runs over 3 kids. Like you don't think about any of the logistics of that. And then you take that sweet idea and then you are introduced to the logistics. You're introduced to the real world, which is like, how much is this going to cost me? How many days am I going to have? What are all the results of this? And then after you shoot it and you film it, which is its own war, you're then plopped in the edit room where none of that other stuff matters. And you're literally staring at a folder in a bin full of clips. And you're trying to go through that bin full of clips and make it into something cohesive. And, the first time you do a film, it's all very much in theory and it's all romantic. And you're sort of staring at this clip or these clips going like, oh my God, what am I thinking? And I don't have enough coverage. And how come this scene feels boring and long? And wow, wouldn't it have been great if I had just shot an insert because then I could have used the next take without anybody noticing that there was a cut between takes. And so you start to learn those lessons over time. And you start to learn those lessons when you start producing too, where it's like, if I hadn't written that this was a scene with like 2 dogs and a kid, this would have cost me like a half of what it would originally cost me. And then no one gave a crap about the dog. You know what I mean? So why was it even in the scene? Yeah. And so I think filmmaking, I've always said that filmmaking is very much like an apprenticeship business. And it comes back to being on crews and stuff again, like working with your hands. Because you're learning by experience, and you can read books about it. You can watch you can watch YouTube videos about it. But essentially you're studying to do exactly what that person did, which it doesn't exist every time. But what that person did was bend and flex and adapt to the weird world that they were exposed to when they were trying to tell a story. You know what I mean?
Do you consider yourself a perfectionist in your work?
I consider myself when I was younger, yes. When I was young, like my first student film that I did, like I was a Hitchcock kid. So I loved Hitchcock and I was trained on silent filmmaking. So my first 3 films were shot with like an old 16 millimeter Bolex. And then it was shot reversal. And then we edited on Steambex, which essentially was, sorting through your film, cutting your film and taping your film together.
Yeah.
And I've always storyboarded. When I was a kid, I loved comic books. I was classically trained as an artist. So I took figure drawing and so I would storyboard out all my stuff. And so my first film was very much storyboarded. So I went through and I storyboarded the shots, came up with the ideas, went and found the location, got the actors to do exactly what was in the storyboards. And then in school, we all shared like a big editing basement. So there was probably like 15, 16 Steambecs in this basement. So you'd be down there cutting with all these other kids. And I remember I literally cut my movie in about an afternoon because I went from the storyboards and I cut it all together. And it was exactly what I had planned. It came with all the flaws that my original thing had, but I was done with it. And like the actual act of shooting and editing it was kind of boring. Like the most interesting portion of it to me was the designing of it. But everything else was just sort of following the numbers and being like, ugh. And then I went and I hung out because I had all the spare time. And I went and I hung out with all these other dudes when they were putting together their movies. And they were so passionate. They were having so much fun in finding it. and in finding these things in the edit and learning about this stuff and bringing it together. And I realized that I had to figure out how to make my career a blend of those two. And so I don't consider myself a perfectionist. I'm a hard worker when it comes to prep, and I'll put together an entire movie, and all my films have like really detailed storyboards and plans, and I plan out my shots with my ADs and put it together with the different producers that I'm working with. But at the end of the day, I always say that these boards are here on set just in case we're out drinking too late the night before and we have a hangover. Because then we could show up and just follow the numbers and we know we're going to get something great. But I try to plan my days now where I leave room to find the amazing stuff. Because if you look at really great films and films that seem to have that quote unquote magic, it's like recently the It franchise, like the first It movie, was such a huge success. And I really think it's because of Skarsgård doing that weird lip thing and that weird lip and eye thing. And that's not something the director planned. That's literally an actor showing up going, I've always done this as a kid. And he makes this weird face. And the director's like, yes, yep. And he picks that. And then he designs the look around that. And then that becomes the creepy thing in the movie. And that's the reason why the first one was so much more successful than the second one. So you have to be prepared. You have to know how to do things. You have to, like you said before, you got to spend time working on crews. You got to spend time learning what it takes to do these things that you're asking of other people. But then you also have to leave it open to be a playground, because I don't care what anybody says. I don't believe in that whole, this director's a genius. Like you don't come out of your mom with like the knowledge of how to do a Steadicam shot. Like these guys aren't born with this stuff. They're just really good at seeing things that are interesting and then honing in on those things. And I think that's the trick.
That's an interesting thought about being too prepared versus finding it. I like that thought because something that I feel like every once in a while, I do commercial work most of the time. So very short form. Things have to be 30 seconds, a minute, whatever.
Yep.
And with that comes so much planning. And sometimes like the original intent of the spot, the spirit of the spot can get lost in the planning sometimes.
Yeah.
And there are times when like I'm in the edit and I'm thinking to myself, like, if I just let that scene breathe a little bit more, if I wasn't so obsessed with getting, I can't think of an exact example at the moment, but if I wasn't so obsessed with, staying on track or like moving to the next shot or something, if I just let it breathe, I think this could have been slightly better. And I've noticed sometimes that it can be a bit of a detriment when you are so familiar with so many different aspects of it, when you are producing and directing and doing some of the post work, that you don't sometimes have the ability to look at the big picture. Do you ever find yourself in those situations? And if so, like how do you solve that?
See, it's an interesting thing. Like directing for commercials is a lot different than directing for film. So like for my movies, like 12KM is a movie that's completely in the Russian language. So it's completely in Russian. I don't speak Russian. It was a very dangerous decision to make. It made my life a lot more difficult, but I was financing it and I was the boss. So I was like, yeah, let's make it in Russian because why not? But when you're doing commercials and stuff, it's a little bit different because you have to answer to so many different folks. Like you have, as you know, you have your clients, and your clients are just like, how much money am I spending on this thing? And then they get nervous over every step. And so then you have to clear everything. You have to clear like, this is what the kid looks like, and this is what the clothes look like. And then you start to have like these seemingly ridiculous phone conferences, where the people are like, really, should it be that color blue? Or maybe it should be a little bit of green. And then I think it's because you're involving a lot of folks in a filmmaking and storytelling process that themselves aren't storytellers. And it's not a detrimental thing to say. It's just that they're not trained to be. And with commercials, those people are like, look, I got a warehouse full of this shit. We got to sell it, And so let's get that done. And then you and I get involved with it. And we're storytellers. And in the beginning, when I first was a young director doing commercials, I was very much like, oh, they wanted to hire me because of the way I tell stories, and they want to have my voice in this commercial. And it was a very short-sighted way.
I'm laughing because it's the exact same thought. Like I'm relating to so much of what you're saying. It's funny.
Yes. And it's a very short-sighted thing where you're sitting there like, it's like they're paying me to make a film or something. And you're like, well, no, it took me years to sort of come to the realization where it's like, this guy's got a warehouse full of shit and I got to help him sell it. That's kind of what I'm doing here.
Yeah.
And so with directing commercials, as a director, I realized that it's a whole different craft. And if you're going to hire me, if you're hiring me as a creative from a creative agency or even a production company, you're hiring me because I have had that experience on how to slow the scenes down and how to find these moments and how to do that stuff. And then as a director, I had to learn that my job isn't necessarily being the guy that comes up with these great ideas, isn't the guy that's telling these stories, because you guys have already done all that hard work. Half the time when I show up as a director, the boards are already done. Like the commercial's pretty much cut together, you know?
Yeah, people don't realize how far along a project is when you're doing commercial filmmaking, how far along a commercial is before you get involved. It's stunning. And then it's weird because you're put in a position sometimes where, especially if you haven't been around that long, where you are now looking at an ad agency who has spent weeks putting this together, and you see something that you don't like or you would change, and you're like, should I suggest my changes? And sometimes it's like, you might not want to do that. You might just want to make it the way that it is. It's weird. It's not that it's not creative, but it's collaborative, but in a different way. Like, it's collaborative, but you're not involved from the beginning. And that's something that I think a lot of commercial directors need to realize.
Yeah, dude. And it really comes down to the true definition of what a director is. And this took so long for me to because I've been doing this for 18, 19 years now. So this took me so long to realize that directing is a social job, first and foremost. And this is something they don't teach you this in school. So you don't go to school and they're like, let me teach you, Mr. Awkward. I have to prove to my dad that I'm special, how to interact with other human beings. In school, they teach you like, this is, if you're lucky, this is how you can cut these two images together, and this is what this means, you know?
Yeah.
So then you got to go through the process of realizing that as an artist, every one of my paintbrushes has a boyfriend at home, has kids at home, has money problems, has real life shit, like came to walk to work and fell down the stairs and broke their ankle, and now you have to figure out how to put them in a wheelchair to do their shit. Like, your brushes are humans. And then you're then dealing with casting these humans. You're dealing with putting together your kit of brushes that you can rely on. And the same thing goes when you're working for commercial clients. Once you have the ability to get that bird's eye view, and that's kind of what a director does. Like, good director will sit there and go from the micro to the wide shot and just stand over the top of it and look around. And when you're in these meetings and you're seeing how these creatives are interacting with the clients, you know that everybody in that room, especially if you've worked with these people before, they're talented. They're talented and they're storytellers. And not only are they good storytellers, but they also understand how to tell a story about a product that people are going to want to purchase. And that's ultimately what you're doing, like I said.
Yeah.
So if you can look around that room and read the room, and you generally can read the faces of the poor creatives that have been interacting with, like Joe Hick, who sells steaks, you know what I mean? And he's just like, get these things out. And they were like, well, wouldn't it be great if we told a story about like how a girl feels and that? And he's like, I don't care. You know what I mean? And so these poor people have been beaten down. And when I come into rooms like that as a director, I sort of look around and I go, okay, you guys have already been through the shit, so maybe I shouldn't suggest the same thing that everybody is thinking in here, because maybe they've already been through this argument like 100 times. You know what I mean? But that being said, I think the skill in being a director is that you have to be a teacher, I think, and you have to be an inspiration. And then you have to be a safety blanket for these people. So like, if you're writing stuff on paper, it's all in theory. And then, the next thing you know, you get to set, the actor's not doing what you guys want, or you haven't found that magic. How many times do clients go like, there just needs to be a little bit more magic. And I don't know what that magic is. And you're like, well, that description is magical. You know what I mean? I don't know what that is either. But I think what that magic really is finding the accidental wow on set. And I think that just takes time and experience to understand where that wow comes and how that wow fits back into the plan. And so I think that's what being a commercial director is. Much different than being a film director.
So much more to discuss with Mike Pecci, but got to take a quick break and talk about Rule Boston Camera. Yes, Rule Boston Camera is the place to go to purchase and rent all of your production equipment. I do it for a couple of reasons. One, they have the best inventory in the business. When huge feature films come through Boston, they are using Rule for their equipment. They just are. I mean, if it's good enough for the big, huge Hollywood features, it is certainly good enough for me. It's good enough for all of us. And it's not even that it's good enough. It's where you want to go. They've been in business for over 35 years. So you can imagine the amount of equipment that they have in their inventory. It's crazy. I'm talking lighting, grip gear, cameras, audio, lenses. I mean, everything that you could possibly want is there. Now, that's reason one. Reason two is that you also get amazing support. You get expert advice and counsel during pre-production, technical guidance when you take the equipment out for your shoot, and they're committed to supporting you while you're on location. Now, I'm talking about peace of mind. Peace of mind. Production is mission critical. You don't want any waste of time. You want good quality equipment. You want great service. If you need to learn how to use that piece of equipment, or if there's any problem on set, you want to make sure that you have support, and Rule has got your back. They are your production partner, and that's why we love them. So head over to rule.com, RULE.com. Check them out for yourself. Rule.com, RULE.com. You still do commercial work, fantastic commercial work. I see it on your Vimeo page. You're releasing it. You're actively doing it. But you're also doing, films. Tell me how it compares and how you sort of blend the two together in your workflow.
Well, films is a little bit different. Films is interesting. I mean, they're starting to really combine because I'm now out here in Los Angeles and I'm reading and writing on like Hollywood scripts and meeting with Hollywood producers. And the industry out here is basically changed a hell of a lot since we were kids. And so most of these companies that are making movies are pretty much corporate clients. You're dealing with these companies that have like a board of directors and all this stuff, and they're running algorithms and they're doing all
Ew. Dude, really? That's what you're finding?
Oh my God, dude. Like you come up with a really great idea and then you walk it into a room. And I think the hardest thing to come up with is the solid idea, like something that's new and fresh. And you have to train yourself on how to try to find these things. And then you walk into a room and the execs are like, yeah, but what if the main character has an alcohol abuse problem and then his wife is leaving him? And I'm like, you mean like every other fucking movie I've ever seen? And they're just like, yeah, but then that'll fit all these demos for us. So then at that point, we'll make billions as opposed to 100,000. And you're like,
wow.
You're like, okay, so how do I tell a story about an alcoholic with wife problems that is an interesting thing, but it also appeals to like the entire spectrum of folks, and it's the term that drives me absolutely insane out here is it relatable. It needs to be relatable. And I'm like, relatable to who? And they're like, everybody.
I'm hearing that, and I'm thinking back to The Lighthouse, which I just saw this week. There's nothing relatable about Lighthouse. The movie is absolutely stunning. Everyone's going to be obsessed with it, I hope. Fingers crossed.
Dude, I can't wait to see it. I cannot wait to see it.
When you see something original and insane, it really makes you feel great about cinema. It really does. And
but But it's
to
not,
hear that people try to squeeze things into these relatable boxes is like, it frustrates me because I don't do any filmmaking like that. And I'm in the commercial world, and I'm always thinking like the grass is greener on that side. And then to hear that it's like kind of not, it's frustrating.
well, dude, because at the end of the day, American filmmaking is American business. It's just American business. And Lighthouse is great because A24 is great. But I've met with the A24 people. They're fantastic, but they have a very specific business plan. And for them, they're trying to make a social media content that appeals to the younger millennial generation. And then also somehow taps into the, like my age, the Generation X, where it's, you watch their trailers and you're like, whoa, this feels like old John Carpenter. You know what I mean? And so they do such a good job creating trailer bait for their movies. And that's really been their focus. And I love their films, but a lot of times when you watch their movies, they have such a restrictive budget that they're like, look, you have to get the content for the trailer. You have to get these really sexy clips for that. And then their third acts usually fall apart. You know what I mean? Like, or it just feels like the movie should have gotten bigger and it didn't get bigger because they're like, well, our business plan is to only do $2 to $3 million movies. And you're like, well, there's not enough room in that budget to have more than 4 set pieces. And you're like, I really wish this film had like 6 or 7 set pieces. And so it's fascinating. Each one of these production companies have their own business models that they put together. And then, you know, the studios ultimately are like, you know, which one is going to make me the most loot? And unfortunately, especially in horror, because I do a lot of horror stuff, and horror seems to be the last standing genre that can still get theatrical, besides comic book superhero shit. And in horror, it's all about, like, these studios like to brag that we only spent this much money and we made, you know, 10 times the amount. We're geniuses. And it's like, you're not necessarily geniuses. You're just smart business people, and you're cramming really good creatives into this tight little box. And sometimes you get some really magical stuff. Like you might get like a Paranormal Activity, or you might get like, you know, like a Green Room, you know, something like that. That's a really great film. But then as a director and as a storyteller, I've got 2 or 3 concepts that I'm working on right now that, you know, I was talking to an executive last week, and I'm like, this movie feels like it should be bigger. And they're like, yes, it does feel like it should be bigger. And I'm like, fantastic. All right, great. So what if I write this thing larger? And they go, it's going to be great, but you can't direct it because you haven't done enough. So you can only direct something that exists within this budget range. And that means
that hurts.
Dude, it sucks. And at that point you're like, okay. And they're like, yeah, because you have to prove yourself in this range. And it's just like, do I though? Or is it just you taking advantage of the fact that I haven't done this yet and you can push me in that range? And then when you start to examine all these big Hollywood blockbusters that have been coming out, like the Godzilla franchise or any, even the Star Wars franchise, and the fact that these giant conglomerates are going and plucking young first, second, third time directors to put them in these positions, it's like, wow, it must be a dream come true. It's like, yeah, but they're also picking that person so that they can bully them into what they need them to do because they don't have the following and they don't have, quote unquote, the creative ego yet. Like, that's why Spielberg's not getting the new Star Wars movie. You know what I mean? Because Spielberg will walk in and go, well, I'm going to do it the way I'm going to do it, and shut up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, so it's a weird, I'm learning these things as I've been out here. It's very strange.
Yeah, I had Lawrence Sher on, Lawrence Sher, the director of photography for Joker last week. Even they had to struggle to get that movie done. Yeah. And it's a comic book movie. I mean, it's not, but you know what I mean. I'm assuming you saw it.
I'm going to see it this week, but I know exactly.
Oh my God, you got to see it. Yeah. But I mean, it's like, how could a Joker, origin story be a challenge to make with a major filmmaker as the director? Like, how is that a challenge? It was really wild to see that even at that level, people are fighting for studio money. It's wild.
Yeah, it's a weird place right now, man, because I don't know. I I don't know if there are too many cooks in the kitchen, and I don't want to say that executives are the devil, because I had dinner with an amazing executive the other night who really believes wholeheartedly in great cinema and loves 1970s cinema and loves all this stuff. But at the same token, she's very aware of what's being purchased.
Yeah, I mean, the executives aren't the. I don't think the executives are the problem, because I'm thinking of it as from like a creative standpoint, from a commercial standpoint. It's like the creative directors, speaking in those terms, they're not the problems. The art directors are not the problems. I think the problem is that it's not even that it's a problem, but you have to make money. And when something has already worked, it's really tough not to try to push your project down that road, because it's tried and true. So I can see where their problem is. I can see where the conflict is.
Yeah, and then we exist. So I think I don't know. This is we're getting deep here, but I think that
go for it.
Dude, I think it's also the fact that we've introduced Silicon Valley into this industry. And
tell me about it.
Like the whole Silicon Valley mentality, where it's like, I'm just going to make an app and become a millionaire. You know what I mean? Or I'm just going to create this piece of technology and it's going to blow up and I'm going to become the next Bill Gates. And that sort of world has been affecting every aspect of our lives right now, whether it comes down to like automated cars, or it comes down to like, the Amazons of the world and the Netflixes of the world and all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of really great creativity that comes from these places, because in the beginning they needed a buttload of content, because they have to continue to keep people subscribing to the network. So it's a lot different than any of the other stuff, because they're not necessarily as interested in the quality of it. They're more interested into is it addictive and is it long running, and can you take this idea and stretch this out to be 15 episodes?
Yeah,
because we need to keep people subscribed. So there needs to be enough content for them to continue to binge and subscribe. And so that's cool, because you get to make all this really great content, but the reason you're making it isn't necessarily, hey, we want to make great movies. It's, hey, we want to become, billionaires.
Yeah.
That's me being very general about it, but I don't know. It's weird, man. Like, I don't want to be a negative, because there is so much opportunity out here and there are so many places for it, but it's the face of the scene is changing so much that it isn't filmmaker savvy at this point. It's not filmmakers that are telling great stories. It's filmmakers that are being hired to tell a story that is already simply marketed and you can put out there. And there are exceptions to this rule, obviously, but yeah, I mean, no one likes an original idea right now.
Yeah.
And everybody is trying to take an idea and cram it into something like, hey, is this Stranger Things? And it's like, well, Stranger Things was Spielberg, and Spielberg was making original content. Spielberg was making original ideas into blockbuster movies, like E.T. and Indiana Jones and The Goonies and Gremlins and all these things that were obviously influenced by the movies that he grew up and loved as a kid, but he was making original content to do this. And audiences right now aren't into that. Like, as good as this Joker movie is going to be, and I know it's going to be good just by the trailer, you start talking to a lot of younger people and they were like, I fell asleep. I was bored. You know what I mean? It's just like, are you bored? Are you bored because it's not a good movie? Or are you bored because of where you are right now as a person? And like, are you bored because you can't take that effing phone and leave it on your table? Like, I was watching Nicholas Raffen's series on Amazon, and what was it? Too Old to Die Young, I think was the name of the series. I don't know if you've seen it. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't. No.
And you know who Nicholas Raffen is? He did Drive. He did Only God Forgives. Yeah. And he's a fetishist, and he's kind of a jerk when it comes to telling stories. But I love that about him, and he is obsessed with what happens when you stretch out a moment. Like his whole series, I think it was like 10 episodes, an hour a piece. So it was like a 10-hour series around a story that could have been told in 2 hours. But
Really?
he really sort of stretched out these moments. And in the first episode I watched, it's beautiful, it's gorgeous, the cinematography is gorgeous. And you watch that first show and you're just like, wow, and you're just enthralled with it. And then you get into the second episode and the pacing is so slow that I found myself just like picking up my phone and looking at my phone. And then I finished that episode and I'm like, maybe I don't like this show. And then I went, no, wait a minute. What does this mean about me? What does this mean about me? That I'm sitting here and I'm picking up my phone and I can't give this person my attention and I can't go with them on this ride because it's not keeping me interested in my current state. And so what I did is I put my phone down and I went, I'm gonna get into this. And so then I started to go at it again. And I kind of relate it to like picking up like a real heavy book. And you pick up a real heavy book and you're like, oh, I can't keep my attention on this thing. And you have to force yourself into it.
Yeah.
And then once I did, I started to discover all these really fascinating things that were happening to me as a person in this pacing. And I started to discover how this filmmaking was affecting me. And then I started to learn that what he was doing was incredibly scary because he was building this reality in which I became entranced by it. And then he would break that reality. And my reaction was very fresh within that reality because of it. And then I was like, whoa, right, this is what filmmaking is. Filmmaking isn't like, you guys want some pizza rolls? I'll make you some pizza rolls. And you run over and you force it down that person's throat. Filmmaking is like, I've got something interesting to teach you. I've got something interesting to show you. I'm learning about this myself. Come into this weird space that I'm in, and let's see how we react to this together. And that's, to me, the elevated version of what filmmaking is. But if you're going to go into a room with someone that's going to hand you, $8-9 million, and that's your fucking sales pitch,
Yeah, exactly.
they're going to kick you right out. They're going to be like, no. If it was your $8 million, then you could do that. But it's not your $8 million. It's mine. And I expect to make $1.5 billion off this $8 million. So get to work.
You are listening to the Premium Beat Song of the Week. This one is called Best Christmas Ever by Young Presidents. Head over to premiumbeat.com to get access to a collection of thousands of royalty-free tracks for as low as $49 each. $49! You don't just get the individual track either. You get cup downs and loop sets and stems, so you can customize your track to fit your project perfectly. A link to this song is in the show notes over at gocreativeshow.com. And when you get to Premium Beat, check it out. See what else they have to offer. I know you're going to love the quality of music, and you're definitely going to love the price. It's all there at premiumbeat.com. And lastly, let's talk about Shutterstock. Shutterstock has millions and millions and millions of royalty-free images and video, and it can be overwhelming to look through them all. It really could. But for people that have accounts with Shutterstock, and you log into your account, you are faced with a fantastic new intelligent homepage. It's just recently launched, and it really shows that they are committed to making sure that you guys not only have access to perfect images and videos, but also the ability to find what you're looking for. So the discovery process is super important to them, and they're always striving to make it better. And this new homepage, this new intelligent homepage, is going to do just that in a few different ways. First, personalization. They make sure that the homepage is personalized to you. They also give you monthly curated collections that they think that would be particularly interesting to you. And they also improve the interaction with your account history. So they're paying attention to what you're buying and the patterns that you're buying them in, and they're making sure that they're using your account history and serving up images and videos that make sense for your buying habits. So every time you go to that homepage, you have a really good first step into your stock image and video search process. And that's what it's all about. Now, of course, in addition to that, their blog is amazing. They have a whole bunch of tools, great articles and information there. It's really the place for inspiration. And I've been talking about that quite a while. So I use Shutterstock for their images and videos and blog and to inspire me. But now with this brand new homepage, it's even better. So head over to Shutterstock.com, create an account if you haven't yet, and take advantage of this brand new intelligent homepage. All right, there is still so much to talk about with Mike Pecci, so let's dive right in to the conclusion of our interview with director Mike Pecci. Well, before you ventured out to the West Coast, you made a couple of short films, more than a couple.
Yep.
I want to talk about 12km. You said the entire film was in Russian, which is a bold choice. When I'm watching it, I'm like, wow, I guess he speaks Russian. But now to hear that you don't speak Russian, I need to know, first of all, how did that decision get made? But among other things, I think for me, let's just give a synopsis of what 12km is. Can people go and see it, by the way, when we're plugging it?
The only way to see the movie is that if you have to follow me on Instagram and you have to write me a message on Instagram and tell me what your 3 favorite horror movies are. And if we agree, then I will send you a private link to watch the movie.
All right. Look at that. So I think that's a call to arms right there. People can certainly do it. But let's dive into it a little bit. First of all, what is the film about? We'll start there. And then I want to get into how it was made, the funding of it, how you work with actors, all of it. We've got this is the way we're going to spend the remainder of our interview. So let's dive in.
All right. Well, I mean, I should give you the origin of the whole thing.
Sure.
So for years, I had been doing commercials and music videos, and we were very successful with it. But I had always had this yearning to get back into telling a good movie and doing that and sort of putting all this stuff that I had been practicing to use. I just didn't have a really great story. And years prior, I had heard about the Kola Peninsula and this team of Russian scientists that had drilled, in real life, the deepest hole known to man. They actually drilled 12 kilometers down into the planet. And then there was this whole rumor that was going around online and I think it was through like Christian Trade magazines and stuff, that these Russians had lowered microphones down into the planet and they heard the screams of hell. And this was a story that I had heard years and years ago. And I was like, this would be a cool movie, but who the hell wants to see it? And I didn't have a personal connection to it. And so then fast forward a few years later and very successful with everything we're doing in the creative and the commercial world. And I just started dating a new girl, and we were going on like our second or third date, and she wanted me to go ice skating. And I had never put ice skates on in my life, And so, and at this point I'm like, I don't know, what was I, 34, something like that. And so I kept blowing her off. She's like, let's go ice skating. I'm like, no, it's fine. Maybe someday. And then she finally hit the point where she goes, well, you never do what I want to do. Or you're like, okay. And
you knew it was coming.
Yeah. And you're like, okay, so this is a real test in our relationship early on. Oh, okay. And so then you sort of justify, you're like, well, what's the worst that's going to happen? Maybe I'll twist an ankle or whatever. And so we go down to Frog Pond down in Boston Common. And I'm slipping on these skates and I'm trying to walk around with them. And she drags me out onto the ice, and I'm being pulled around, and I'm watching like these 5-year-olds pirouette around me, and I'm just getting annoyed. And so I tell her, like, do me a favor, just skate off and let me figure this out. I'll figure this out. And so she skates away, and there's this kid next to me, and I watch him push himself off. I watch him do the process of it, and I'm like, okay, I could do that. So I go and I push myself off, and I slip, and I go completely backwards and do almost a 180, and I land on my head. And the last thing I hear is an old oak barrel crack, and I'm out. I'm out clean.
Jesus, wow.
And I wake up in intensive care. There's a doctor looking at me, shining a flashlight in my face, and he's like, okay, so here's the deal. And I wake up, and I'm like, God damn it, I've like broke my leg, and I passed out, and I got all this work to do. I had never taken a break. And he's like, okay, so you've cracked your skull. You're bleeding internally. You've got a hematoma that's forming on top of your head. And what we normally do is we drill into the skull to release the pressure, but the hematoma is forming over your main blood vessel in your brain. So like if we drill just a skosh too deep, you bleed out and you die. And so you got to call your family. We can't let you go back to sleep because you might not wake up. And we're going to see if the bleeding stops. And that's kind of what we're going to do. And so then that started my 5 days in intensive care.
Oh my God.
And because of the pressure that was forming on my head, it was causing hallucinations. And I was convinced that my inner voice wasn't my own, that my inner voice was somebody else. And then I was seeing all these really strange hallucinations, I guess the only way to say it, like shadows were coming alive and the room was coming alive. And of course, being a storyteller, I was completely fascinated by it. There are these recorded cell phone recordings where I would turn to the girl that I was with, and I was like, I need you to record this. And I was just telling stories that I was going through with the whole
Wow.
thing. And then ended up going through intensive care. The bleeding stopped, but then I was having insane vertigo from the multiple concussions and everything. So the doctor was like, you can't do anything for 5 months, 6 months. And so I was pretty much bedridden. And
Oh my God.
at that time, I was just so inspired by what I was going through that I started to write a script. And I started to put together an idea for 12KM, which I wanted to talk about what would it be like if your inner voice didn't belong to you anymore? And if your inner voice was telling you to do things that you didn't want it to do. And then what would cause that inner voice to do that? And I started to dig into like, well, maybe it'd be interesting if you were infected by something. And then where did that come from? And then I came back to that Russian story, the Kola Peninsula story. And I'm like, that's such a great origin for something like this. And so I basically wrote it all out while I in between vertigo and crazy headaches for, 5 months. And then when I finished it, I came back to at my time, my business partner, and I'm like, look, I gotta do this, man. Like anything, like when I was staring death in the face, I didn't have anything to complain about. I've had a good life, a great family, a very successful career in the commercial and the music video world. But the only thing that I didn't have was I didn't get to make a feature. I didn't get to make my movie. And at that point, I really needed to change my trajectory, essentially, and try to make it work. And so luckily, after 5 months, I fully recovered, which helps.
I'd say so.
And it really helps make that story more fun because it's like I went on this crazy adventure with this. And then I just came out and I said, okay, look, I got to make a movie. Now, prior to this, I was trying to do some filmmaking and I was like, look, I'm going to make a Marvel fan film. So I made this Punisher fan film in which I got this whole crew together, really amazing team of people that I had sort of, put together over, I don't know, whatever, it'd been 10 years, 11 years, whatever. And we made an amazing short. And the piece was like really gorgeous. And I started to put trailers out there and started to tease it. And this was prior to Netflix deal with Marvel. This is prior to like, I think Iron Man maybe had come out. And so we were getting a ton of publicity. Like they would write about it on CBR and all these different websites. And it was like better than anything Marvel's ever done. And so then Marvel sent me a cease and desist and I wasn't able to show that film to anybody. And so I had asked this entire crew of people, including actors, to make this piece that the world couldn't see. And so I knew that if I was going to go back to the well, so to speak, I needed to make something that I could screen, something that I could make a big event out of, because knowing that all my paintbrushes are people, I knew that these people, I couldn't go back to them again and do something that no one was going to see. And so I took what would essentially have been the cold open for my feature script, which is like Russia, 1980s, boom, and I was like, look, let's expand this out and make this into something that I can screen in a theater. And so I was like, I'll make a 30-minute short. And I had done the research online and it was like festivals take shorts up to 40 minutes. Okay, great, cool. So I will do a 30-minute piece. And then since I was my own boss, I always hated it when you watch movies and they go, Russia, 1988. And then they cut, and there's a guy speaking English going like, with a bad Russian accent, like, lower the stuff into the pit, and it's just like, all right. And so I was like, I think it's better if I do it in the actual language. If I do it in the Russian language, the Russian language is a scary language to listen to. It's a very abrasive language. That'll add to it. And then there was the economical, like the producer in me that was like, I'm probably not going to get amazing actors to do this. So if I get actors that are speaking in another language, then the American audience will kind of be like, well, that's how they do it there.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. So like there's a part of me that's like, okay, let's just cast people that speak in a different language. And then I, being sort of an arrogant, dude, I was just like, well, I'll just get some translators. What's the big deal? And it turned out to be a bit bigger of a deal because translating American sarcasm into Russian is very difficult because they just don't get it. Yeah. And that was a big process for me, trying to convince a well-trained stage actor in his 80s that as an American kid, that sarcasm is okay, which was an interesting dilemma. But it ended up being such a smart move on my part because there are so many talented Russian actors out there that the only thing that they get offered is like, you want to be the henchman, you want to be the guy that drives the car that gets shot in the head. And so it opened up this big world to me of like really, really talented actors that, of course, it's a short film. So normally, like if I had asked Al Pacino to be in my short film, he would have been like, who's this kid? And why am I even talking to him? Yeah. But Ernst, who is in our film, the guy who plays the professor, he's Al Pacino level in Russian Broadway. So it's like I was able to get him on my movie. So it was a pretty smart move to do it that way. Wow.
Where did you get your talent from?
We ended up casting both in Boston because Boston's got a pretty big Russian community. And then we also cast out in New York. So New York also has like a big, big Russian community. And then the lead in the film, Ara, he speaks Russian, and him and I have known each other for years. He was in a movie that I had DP'd called Smoke by Evan Sussman, who is the owner over at Hero for Hire.
Okay.
And he had hired me to shoot his movie, and I had worked with Ara on that. And then Ara and I had been keeping together for years, and we had joked because I told him about this Russian drill team, and he's like, I will do it. And he's like, I can speak Russian, and I'll do it. And so he was the first guy that I cast. And then I was like, dude, how would you like to be sort of an associate producer on this and help me go through the casting sessions? Because you do speak Russian. And he was like, I'd love to. And I said, can we do the casting sessions in Russian? Can we just do them completely in the Russian language? Because my idea was that essentially I am the audience. And so I need to watch these guys say stuff that I don't understand, but still be enthralled by them. And that was kind of what the casting session became, was him sort of running it as a Russian, and then I would be that American director that didn't speak the language, and then they would come in with their own material. They would actually bring in their own lines. And I remember, specifically, this one guy came in. We were in New York, and we were backstage casting, I think is what we were using, and we had this small room rented out. And this dude comes in, older guy, Russian guy, and he comes in to do his lines, and R is setting the whole thing up. And I'm just sort of sitting there in the back watching, and R turns to me and he goes, okay, he's prepared something. I'm like, okay. And I can't speak Russian, so bear with me. And so the guy turns slowly, dramatically, and looks at us, and he just starts to deliver these lines. He's just like, blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. And as he's talking, I'm leaning further on my desk. I'm leaning closer, and I'm getting in closer. And I'm just like, wow. And his face, and he has these long pauses and these long moments. And he just gets through the whole piece. And I'm just applaud for him. I'm like, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I was like, great. He leaves the room and I turn to R and I go, that guy was fantastic. And R goes, he sucked. He couldn't. I knew what that thing is. He got the lines all wrong. He didn't know what he was saying. He was terrible. And I said, yes, but this theory's going to work. Because even if he's terrible, this movie's ultimately being made for an American audience. So I can change the subtitles to whatever I want. So he was interesting. And R is like, you cannot hire that guy.
Wow.
Yeah, man. So it ended up being an interesting experiment in perception.
Did you play with subtitles at all, or is everything accurate?
Everything's pretty accurate. The only subtitle manipulation I would do, sometimes translating the technical meaning reads weird. So
okay.
I think there was just a few times that I just sort of Americanized a couple of things in there, but generally it was on point. And surprisingly, and this will blow your mind, because how do you edit a movie in another language?
Yeah, I was thinking, did you just have the whole thing translated and then you edited with that, with dailies that are translated? What did you do?
Here's what I did, man. I literally found the wide shot and I listened to the wide shot and I listened to the rhythms of what they were saying and then cut off of that. I didn't even have it translated. I went through the whole process and I just listened to the rhythms and I saw the body language that was happening there. And then I cut to it and I only had 2 or 3 mistakes. That's it. And because I went through and I had a translator go through and I'm like, did I fuck this up? And they were just like, no. Did you have it translated? I was like, no, I just followed the rhythms of what was happening. And they're like, it's almost perfect. You just have a couple of lines where they say the same thing twice here and here. And that's it.
Wow. Yeah. What an interesting exercise to go through. To base an edit off of just body language is kind of, well, you know what? It's interesting because you had mentioned earlier that silent films is where your training is. Mm-hmm. There's got to be something there where you're just in tune with body language.
But then that's cinema, man. At the end of the day, I think that, all right, this is probably a controversial statement, but I think that people get really obsessed with scripts. I think people get really obsessed with talking in movies. And I think that there is sort of a lack of interest in the visual storytelling that cinema is. Cinema essentially is one photograph and another photograph cut next to each other. And what does that mean? And then you introduce sound. And then you introduce all the stuff. So when you go back and you look at silent filmmaking, or even if you go back and you look at Kurosawa, and you look at the acting that's in old Kurosawa movies, people are like, it seems like they're being overly dramatic. And I'm like, yeah, they are intentionally. He's intentionally making this person wear all of that character's emotions on their sleeve and actually act them out bigger, because you visually can watch this thing and completely understand where they're coming from, instead of having them walk in the room and go, I hate my dad. My dad was always a piece of shit to me, and now I can and it's just the whole talking aspect that happens in so much of our modern stuff. And then it's like, okay, cool. What are we talking about? Are we talking about something new and something interesting? And then it comes back to that conversation we had earlier, where it's like, we need to tell a story about an alcoholic and his wife again. You're just like, God damn it, man! I'm filling my films and my pieces with the most mundane. We've all heard this story before. We've all seen Breaking Bad. We've all seen The Sopranos. We've all seen the bad guy that is humanized, and now but we have to remember that he's really a piece of shit still. We've seen that shit over and over and over again. Can I not make a film about something as basic as making a sandwich? Can I not make a film visually that speaks whether or not you understand the language, whether or not you know what they're saying? And then, oh my God, here's an interesting idea. When I add the dialogue on top of it, it adds something to the movie. That's interesting. That's an interesting philosophy. The same way, if I add music to the scene, it adds something emotionally to it. Holy shit. That's really interesting too. You know what I mean? Drives me crazy. Obviously, you've hit a nerve because my tone changed. And I
like it. I like it. You do have a very strong soundtrack in your films. I'm seeing that And I think it's probably your commercial work, I mean, your music video work that's really bringing that in. But, and you know, silent films, again, I mean, obviously silent, but a lot of the times you have some music attached to it as well. You do have a really keen sense of sound design, and the levels are loud. There's a lot of noise. You drive a lot of the storytelling and the sound. How much of that is you, and how much of that is just your, sound designer?
Well, when I moved to Boston and moved back to Boston, and I started to work in the industry, I ended up getting a studio, and I shared a studio space with two other guys. And one of the guys that I shared the space with was one of the best sound engineers, sound mixers in the city. He is thus gone on to be like Ben Affleck's sound mixer. He does like all the big Hollywood stuff, and I think he's now moved to New York. But in the beginning, he was the dude that I hung out with. And when I was trying to get on film sets, like independent film sets, he was the first guy that I really spent time with. And he would just invite me on to help him out doing sound mixing and sound recording. Mm-hmm. And so I used to sit at his sound cart with headphones on and listen to what was happening. And then he started to have like a post-sound space. And I remember he was working on a kung fu movie. And so he was starting to sound design a kung fu film. And I had all the time in the world because I wasn't working really. And he's like, we got to do some sound effects. And so we started to record, breaking bones, and you're crunching on celery, and you're doing all this stuff. And you're starting to really put the stuff together. And I really loved it. I thought it was such a really fun aspect of filmmaking. And if I wasn't so involved in the visuals, and if I wasn't, cinematographer and doing all this stuff, that I could easily find myself loving sound design. And thankfully, I spent years working with him doing that, because now when I write scripts, I know the power of sound. So when you read the scripts, I'll put notes on what sound are going to be in there, and I'll put notes on sound cues and that kind of stuff in the scripts that it's important to the story. Mm. And so with 12 Cam, I sound designed the majority of that. I also worked with this really great composer, Michael Tran, who composed the movie and also helped me do sound stuff, because there hits a point where I can sound edit easily, but then you start getting technical, and it's like, how are the frequencies canceling each other out and all this kind of stuff. And
you lose the feel.
At that point, you start to hand that over to somebody else. But I can't cut a movie without putting sound effects in to cut it, especially horror. Because, you look at scenes and like Who's There, where, the camera's floating down the hallway, and you're just like, you're cutting those and there's no sound to it. And you're like, I have no idea if this is scary or not. And you have to start putting sound effects in early on to do that. And then when you know that that's part of the process, that early on, it's not an afterthought. You're not like, okay, this needs to be scarier. You're using that as part of your building process. And 12 Cam was a big part of that. And for me, I knew that because most people watching that movie won't speak Russian, I wanted to make that movie as fascinating as I possibly could before I even put subtitles on it. And I think the biggest compliment that I get on that film is that people are like, I didn't even read the subtitles. I didn't even need to read the subtitles, and I was scared to shit of that movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely feel that way as well. It's compelling no matter what. You find yourself at first reading it, but then your eyes kind of drift from it. You don't need it anymore.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting. And our last couple of minutes, I want to talk about funding for 12KM and also the distribution and how you handled that. Let's start with funding. Where did you get the funding for this film? It looks expensive. I mean, it looks great. It does not look low budget by any means.
Yeah, no.
Where did that, how did that process happen for you?
Well, so it started with a Kickstarter. So we put together a Kickstarter, which in itself is such a weird, it's such a strange, it's basically a job. So doing a Kickstarter thing, like anything in this business, I feel like we just have to teach it to ourselves and figure it out. And I went through this process, and me and my assistant at the time, Tony Fernandez, went through and designed a Kickstarter campaign, figured out the incentives. I started to reach out to comic book artists that I knew, and they started to create concept art for us. And then we tried to figure out how to roll out a successful Kickstarter campaign. It was a pretty good learning lesson, but we figured it out. And so through Kickstarter, and that we could do a whole episode on that. Through Kickstarter, we raised about 16, I think it was like 16,500, something like that. And I knew that was going to be the most I could ask for, with where my community was at that time. And so raised that money, and then I funded the rest of it myself. And I had done 1 or 2 big commercials. And so I just sort of pocketed most of that money and was like, okay, cool, this money's going to be used for this. So I won't go on vacation. I won't buy a new car. I won't do any of that stuff. I'll just use pretty much what that would cost to finish funding this film. It was good because at that point, I didn't have anybody over me. I was pretty much the boss, which was great.
Yeah.
And especially for something like this where it's so experimental, you need to be the boss for it. But it was cool, man. Like a lot of people just sort of raise their eyebrow when when I tell them how much I've actually invested in that film financially, and they're just like, "Oh my God, how do you do it?" And it's like, it's actually pretty easy to do. I think a lot of us just get really scared about spending that kind of money because they're like, what ultimately is this going to do for me? And where does this go? And I'll just say this, like fast forward, a year and 2 years after I made that movie, I'm literally sitting in Michael Bay's office with it, and I'm having his producers play a game where they're trying to guess how much it costs. And their estimates for it were just ridiculous. One dude was like, "I'm really good at this. 300,000." And I'm like, "No, oh man." And he's like, "Well, how much does it cost?" I'm like, "I'm not going to tell you, but it's not 300,000." But and then fast forward to being in Ridley Scott's office. You know what I mean? And so the way I look at it, that movie cost me a good chunk of change, but it got me representation. So I'm now, my agent is over at UTA. I have management out here. That movie got me into every major production company in Hollywood, and specifically just from the management sending them an email saying, "Watch this, close your blinds, put on some headphones. This will blow your mind." And so I got meetings all off of that because of that movie. Wow. And going into these meetings, it's different than doing your standard general, they call it, like a general meeting, where you walk in there and they're like, "Okay, tell me about you." It's like this weird sort of like, speed dating thing. Yeah. These guys had all seen the movie first. So I'd walk in the room and immediately they'd go, "Oh, you're not Russian?" Like, that's the first thing. They'd just be like, "You're not a Russian guy?" And I'm like, "No, I'm a fucking Italian dude from Boston."
Oh my God.
And then because of that film, these guys would ask me questions. So I'd go into these meetings and they were enthralled. And they were just like, "How'd you pull it together? And like, where did you get the props? And where did you shoot this? Did you shoot this in Europe?" I'm like, "No, I shot this in Franklin, Mass." "Where did you get the drill set?" I'm like, "It's a warehouse." Like it's just all this really interesting stuff that I think that out here in the business, there's a big portion of people that don't have to do nitty-gritty stuff. And so they don't have to bring these things together and put them together on their own, and they just don't have that training. And so when they meet folks that can make 1980s Russia on a budget, they're just like, "How did you pull this off? And this cost you how much money?" So it was good, man. It was really great.
Well, what were your decisions for distribution? Now, I know you said people can email you, tell them your favorite 3 horror movies, and only if you agree, you will give them the passcode. But what was your decision before that? Like, was the plan there must have been a plan to get this thing out at some point.
Yeah. So initially, after making the movie, my goal was to do festivals. And I have been in a bunch of film festivals, and I have, been through the circuit. And I wanted to do the film festival thing with this. But the movie was built to be screened in theaters. I mean, I literally color corrected this movie. I convinced this amazing company in New York to let me color correct it. And they do like Michael Bay stuff. They do big stuff. And I literally went out to New York and color corrected it in a theater. So like I watched it on a big screen while they were color correcting.
Wow.
So the movie was built for theater stuff. And when I was cutting it, towards the end of cutting it, I was good friends with like Mark from the Coolidge Corner Theater, a bunch of dudes that are program directors at film festivals. And so what I did was, I was like, how would you guys like to see my movie before anybody else does? I'd love to have you come in the edit room and look at this film. And they love that shit because they get connected to filmmakers more. And so they came in the room and I showed them an early screening of 12 Cam, and Mark watched it. And he went through and watched the film, and it was like one of those weird screenings where you're sort of crammed in this tiny little edit room and he's watching the monitor. He's really quiet the whole time. And then I'm sort of sitting there going like, oof, you know, and we finished the screening and I'm like, so what did you think, dude? Like, do you like it? And he turns to me real slow and he goes, it's really amazing. It's fucking awesome. And I was like, okay, all right. That's good. That's good. And I was like, so what do you think? Like, is there festivals that I should submit it to? Like, where do you think I should send it? He goes, yeah, you're not going to get into any film festivals with this. And I was like, why? And he goes, it's too long. And I'm like, okay. They say on all the film festival websites, if it's under 40 minutes, he goes, yeah. They want shorts that are like 15 minutes max. He's like, if they program your short, they lose 2 or 3 other shorts in their program. And I was like, okay. So I was like, so what do you want me to cut out? What do you think I should cut out? He goes, don't cut anything. And so I was like, so I'm screwed, is what you're saying. It was like one of those moments where I'm like, so I'm screwed, right? And he's like, I could try to get, I'll suggest some festivals and see if we can get you into some places, but, it's going to be a hard time for you on this. But it's a really great movie. I love the movie, and I don't think you should change anything. And so I was frustrated, to say the least, but I still did the submission process. And, if you're submitting to film festivals, it's like throwing away money. It was just like, $800 out the window, like immediately. I got rejected from almost all of them. I think I got into 2. And it was very frustrating. And so then because of coming from music video world, where those guys are all about press releases and dropping press releases and putting that stuff out, I'm like, well, I'm going to do some press releasing for this. I'm going to create a trailer. I'm going to try to create a buzz online. So I started to do that, and I had a bunch of different outlets writing articles for me. And I had a call from a woman that I had met a few times at a film festival, and she was like, I'd love to do an article on it. And I had just done a big article, and I thought that big article was going to be the one. Mm. And I was like, sure, why not? I'll send you the link. Here's the link. Boom. Sent you the link. I wasn't even thinking about it. And she wrote an article, I think it was for Twitch Film. And she wrote an article that was fantastic. She loved the movie, and she finished off the article with like, this is something that Hollywood needs to see, and this is something that Hollywood needs to do. And that week, I started to get phone calls from studios. I got phone calls from management. I got phone calls from people. And I didn't realize that whatever website she was writing for was a website that the industry keeps their eyes on. And so then that changed everything for me, because then at that point, I was literally having the most important people see this movie. I was literally having the executives see this movie. I was literally having the production company see this movie. And so then I didn't have to put it online. And it's something that I had learned from doing the Punisher piece. I couldn't release that Punisher film and then that trailer alone. And then I was able to write an article. My lawyer suggested that I write an article about how I made the movie. And so that ended up getting fire, basically. And people were really excited about it. And so weekly, I still have people write to me and saying, we want to see your Punisher film. I really want to see it. And I'm never going to release it because it'll never live up to the hype. But it became that punk rock album that never got released and that everybody wanted to see. And so that was interesting to me and sort of informed the way that I release stuff now, because you put shit up online, there's so much stuff that just gets released and people just digest it. They just don't give a shit about it. And with 12 Cam, my whole thing has been that. Like, if you want to watch this movie, it's amazing. It's done all these really great things. If you want to be someone that has seen this, then you have to communicate with me directly. And then what I do, the folks that do write to me, I usually send them an email. And in that email, I'll give them instructions. And it's like, you don't have to pay me to see this movie. But what I would love you to do is watch the film and write me a review on IMDb. And here are all the steps that you have to take to do so. But write me an honest review. on IMDb. And I've had hundreds and hundreds of people do that. And there's something special about feeling like it's a special thing. So when you're an audience member, you're just like, I'm one of the few that get to see this, which is true. And then I can have some sort of involvement and communicate with the director, which is also true. This is special. And I think that ended up being my release strategy for it. So I don't think I'm ever going to drop it up there for free. And the only way you're going to be able to see it is if you write to me and you communicate with me. You become part of the club.
What an interesting story. I love this. Mike Pecci, thank you so much for being on the show. Commercials, films, music videos, photography. I mean, you're doing it all. And a podcast, we should mention as well, In Love with the Process podcast. You can find it all at mikepecci.com, MikePecci.com. Oh my God. I mean, such great stuff. And I feel a sense of pride. You're like a hometown boy doing right by Boston. And I absolutely love that. So glad you're out there doing your thing. And thank you so much for, giving us some insight into the way that you work. It's an incredible story. And I'm so proud of you.
Thanks, man. And dude, I'm all over the place. So I'm here and I'm in Boston all the time. So we should work together. Find a way to convince your clients that they need some crazy dude that made Russia.
I know exactly. Hey, do you want to do a commercial in Russian? I got the perfect guy for you. He can't speak it, but for some reason it works.
I think that's perfect. I think that's perfect.
Right. Excellent. Thank you so much. I'll put all the links to your social media, of course, your website, on our site, gocreativeshow.com. And we'd have to have you back when you get your next big, huge movie because it's happening.
Well, I appreciate that, man. And like you said before, I'm just going to do a quick plug. Check out my podcast, In Love with the Process. You'll be able to get an insight into everything that I'm going through. So it's a pretty good one.
There he is. Mike Pecci, thank you so much. I want to thank Mike Pecci for coming on the show and talking about his experiences. I hope you guys got as much out of that episode as I did. And if you want to hear even more of Mike and I speaking together, check out his podcast, In Love with the Process. I was a recent guest on there. You can find me right there on their homepage, inlovewiththeprocess.com. And check it out. We continue our conversation, and it's a good one. It's a good one. I also want to thank Matt Russell for mixing and mastering and making the show sound so good. You can find him at gainstructure.com and on Twitter at gainstructure. And our producer, Connor Crosby, for making this whole thing happen. You can find him at ignitionvisuals.com and on Twitter, ignitionvisuals. And of course, when you're on these platforms, please do follow us because we give you an opportunity, our Go Creative Show audience, we give you an opportunity to ask questions to our upcoming guests on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. So please follow us there so you can see what's going on with the show and get your question heard on the show. And of course, our sponsors, Rural Boston Camera, Shutterstock, Hedge, and Premium Beat. Without these people, the show wouldn't exist. So please support those that support us, and we will see you next week.